In the midst of the brutal Battle of the Bulge, on Christmas Eve 1944, Elizabeth Venkin exemplified extraordinary compassion, decency, and courage when she opened her remote cabin door to American soldiers. She defied Nazi laws that could lead to her own execution. In Nazi Germany during World War II, civilians who harbored American or other Allied soldiers were typically charged with high treason or aiding the enemy. These offenses fell under the jurisdiction of special courts or the People's Courts, which operated with minimal due process and emphasized swift, severe punishments to deter resistance and maintain loyalty to the regime. Such acts were viewed as endangering national defense, often resulting in the death penalty, either through formal execution by guillotine, firing squad, or hanging, or immediate summary justice by the SS or Gestapo units without trial. Offenders could also face deportation to concentration camps as political prisoners, where they endured forced labor, starvation, and high mortality rates. The government enforced these measures rigorously through informants, neighborhood wardens, and propaganda, with thousands executed or imprisoned for similar wartime disloyalty. This took place between 1933 and 1945, many for actions perceived as betraying the war effort. This draconian approach intensified as the war progressed, reflecting the regime's paranoia and desperation to suppress any internal support for Allied forces. So Elizabeth risked her own life, as well as the life of her 12-year-old son, by taking in enemy soldiers on that brutally cold and snowy Christmas Eve night. It was late 1944, but right in the thick of World War II. The Battle of the Bulge was raging through Ardennes Forest in Belgium and Germany. Tens of thousands of soldiers were clashing in brutal combat, with snow blanketing everything. Temperatures were plummeting well below freezing, and the air was filled with the constant thunder of artillery. Amid all that chaos, there was a tiny hunting cabin tucked away in the Hurtgen forest, near the German-Belgian border. Inside that cabin lived a 12-year-old boy named Fritz Venkin and his mother Elizabeth, who were trying to survive the brutal war in winter. Their home back in Aachen had been bombed to rubble by Allied airplanes in April of that year, destroying the family bakery where Fritz's father Hubert had worked. Hubert was too old for frontline duty, but still served in a civilian capacity baking bread for the German troops. He pulled some strings to get his wife and his son hidden away in this remote wooden hut owned by his employer. It was supposed to be a safe spot, far from the cities and the fighting, but now the war had come crashing down near their doorstep as the Battle of the Bulge started in December of 1944. The front lines shifted perilously close, turning their sanctuary into a potential war zone. Elizabeth and Fritz saw searchlight beams at night. They heard the field guns in the vicinity and the warplanes in the sky. Fritz's dad could only visit occasionally, sneaking out with supplies when possible. On this particular Christmas Eve, Fritz and Elizabeth were alone. They'd been rationing food carefully, potatoes, some canned goods, and a scrawny rooster that Fritz had been fattening up through the fall. Fritz had brazenly named the bird Hermann, after Hermann Göring, the Nazi leader, because as a kid, he didn't much care for the guy and figured it was a fitting name for something destined for the dinner table. That evening, as the snow piled up outside, amid a brutal blizzard, Elizabeth decides to make the best of it. She slaughters her mon, roasts him up with some potatoes, and sets a modest Christmas table. The cabin was warm from the wood stove, and a single candle flickered. For a moment, it felt peaceful. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. Elizabeth froze in fear. In wartime, a knock could mean anything: the Gestapo, deserters, most likely danger. Elizabeth blew out the candles and went to the door. Fritz assumed it was his dad. She cracks the door open, and there, shivering in the blizzard, are 3 American soldiers. They were lost, half frozen, and one had a leg that was badly wounded. These guys were from the 121st Infantry Regiment of the 8th Division. The young men named Jim, Ralph, and a corporal they called Harry, who was the injured one, had been separated from their unit during the fighting, wandering for days in the snow without food or decent shelter. Elizabeth didn't speak much English, but she understood it well enough. One of the soldiers asked her if she spoke French. Fortunately, she did. They were able to communicate that way. She looked at these boys, and they were barely older than teenagers themselves. Elizabeth, knowing full well harboring enemy combatants was punishable by death under Nazi law. She was driven by her maternal instincts and Christian faith. She invited them inside without hesitation. She helped remove their snow-caked boots. She warmed them by the fire and bandaged Harry's wounds using whatever supplies she had. Fritz watched, wide-eyed, as his mom tended to Harry's wound, wrapping it with the clean cloth. The Americans were grateful, sharing what little they had, a few cigarettes and some chocolate from their rations. The smell of roasting chicken filled the air, and for the first time in days, these soldiers felt a glimmer of humanity. The night wasn't over. The true measure of her bravery unfolded shortly after, when another knock came. Elizabeth went to the door. Her heart was pounding. This time, it was 4 young German soldiers, infantrymen, not the SS, thank God. They were led by a corporal and just as lost and hungry as the Americans. They'd been dredging through the forest, disoriented in the storm, with no food for 2 days. Elizabeth stepped outside into the snow, closing the door behind her. She tells them straight up, "I have guests inside. You're welcome to come in and share our meal, but only if you leave your weapons outside. No fighting in my house, not tonight." Peering through the window, the Germans spotted the Americans inside. Tension spiked. These men were sworn enemies, fresh from battles, where they'd been trying to kill each other. Yet Elizabeth stood firm, her voice steady as she declared the cabin a neutral zone for the night. The Germans hesitated, but the corporal nodded. The soldiers complied, leaving their rifles in the snow. It was Christmas, and they were battle-worn. Inside, the air was thick with suspicion. The Americans stiffened, their hands inches away from their hidden sidearms. The Germans eyed them cautiously. Fritz felt as though the room could explode at any second. But Elizabeth took charge like a force of nature. She declared the cabin a neutral zone. No talk of war, no hostility. She was the boss inside that tiny cabin, and everyone fell in line. One of the Germans, a former medical student, noticed Harry's wound and offered to help. He cleaned it properly using supplies from his pack, easing the Americans' pain. The language barrier melted away as they communicated in broken words and gestures. Elizabeth said grace. However, it wasn't a scripted prayer. It was something spontaneous. She said, "Let's all be thankful to the Lord for being together tonight, being peaceful in this terrible war. Let's enjoy dinner, the little things that we have, and let's promise to be friendly to each other forever, if possible. Let's also pray for an end to this terrible war so that we can all go home very soon." All the soldiers were crying by the end of the prayer, even the German sergeant. Elizabeth served up the roasted chicken. Hermann, he was a feast for 7 now. Elizabeth stretched the meal with potatoes and whatever else they could scrounge up. The soldiers contributed too. The Germans had some bread and wine, and the Americans had their chocolate and some coffee. They ate together, laughing nervously at first, then genuinely, as the stories flowed. They talked about home, their families, anything but the fighting. As the night deepened, something magical happened. One of the Germans pulled out a battered harmonica and started playing Silent Night. The Americans joined in with the English version, their voices blending in by candlelight. Fritz watched in awe as these young men, who hours ago might have shot each other on sight, continued sharing songs, cigarettes, and even tears throughout the night. There was talk of their loved ones back home and the Christmases they missed. The wounded American was resting easier, and the German guards, they were calm and relaxed. Outside, the war raged on. Distant explosions rumbled like thunder, but inside that cabin, for just one night, peace reigned. They all slept under the same roof, with a warm fire crackling. Enemies turned guests, bound by a mother's courage in the spirit of the holiday. Morning came. It was Christmas Day, and the snow had stopped. Elizabeth made a simple breakfast with the leftovers. The German corporal checked a map with the Americans, pointing out the securest path back to Allied lines. The Americans, in turn, shared their compass to help the Germans orient towards their own troops. They even fashioned a makeshift stretcher from bed sheets and branches for Harry, so his buddies could carry him. Before parting, the soldiers shook hands. Yep, they actually shook hands. The German corporal looked at the Americans and said in halting English, "God bless you, and may we meet again when there is peace." The Americans nodded, wishing them a Merry Christmas, and they went their separate ways. Elizabeth and Fritz never forgot that night. They survived the war, although the cabin was later damaged in the fighting. Hubert, Fritz's dad, rejoined them, and the family rebuilt their lives. But the story, it always stayed with Fritz. Fritz saw the Americans as liberators, and he became fascinated with everything American. Years later, in 1958, he married Emma and started a family. In 1959, Fritz and his family immigrated to the United States. They settled down in Honolulu, Hawaii, and Fritz opened his own bakery. He named it Fritz's European Bakery. He was baking bread the way his dad had taught him. He always wondered about those soldiers. Did they make it home? But there's more to this story, so hold on. A few years later, at the urging of an American friend, he submitted this story to Reader's Digest. That special night in 1944 remained a defining moment in his life. He hoped to find the soldiers who helped him learn the true meaning of Christmas. He gained some publicity through the 1973 article in Reader's Digest, and the story even caught the attention of President Ronald Reagan, who referenced it in a 1985 speech in Germany about peace and reconciliation. However, it wasn't until 1995 that a breakthrough occurred when the tale was featured on the television show Unsolved Mysteries. It was Season 7, Episode 16. It was hosted by Robert Stack. Fritz appeared on the episode sharing his memories in hopes of locating the men. A volunteer chaplain at a nursing home in Frederick, Maryland, watched the broadcast and immediately recognized the story. It mirrored one repeatedly told by an elderly resident named Ralph Blank, a World War II veteran who had served as a sergeant in the 8th Infantry Division. The chaplain contacted the show's producer, who then reached out to Fritz in Hawaii. Fritz and Ralph first connected over the phone, confirming the details of that night, including how Fritz's mother, Elizabeth, had brokered the truce. This set the stage for their in-person meeting. The reunion took place on January 19th of 1996, when Fritz flew to Maryland to visit Ralph at the nursing home. Ralph was 76 years old and in poor health, and Fritz, he was in his mid-60s. They immediately recognized each other. They embraced and reminisced about the shared meal, the songs they sang that night, and the brief oasis of peace amid the Battle of the Bulge. Ralph still possessed the compass and map given to him by one of the German soldiers, and he showed it to Fritz as a tangible reminder of the event. They hugged, laughed, and cried, reliving that Christmas Eve. Ralph was a retired bricklayer from Frederick, and he had moved into the nursing home a year earlier due to heart problems. Ralph told Fritz, "Your mother saved my life." Sadly, by the time of their reunion, the other Americans had passed. But one German soldier's son reached out later, sharing that his father had told the same story before dying in the 1970s. Tragically, neither man lived to see the 2002 television movie Silent Night, which dramatized their story. Ralph passed away in 1999 at the age of 79, and Fritz died in 2001 at the age of 69. The fate of these young men were held by evil men in powerful positions, but one woman and her son shifted their fate for at least one day in 1944. I call this a miracle. Thank you for watching. Merry Christmas.